So now, you know, he has published his habilitation, Wolf at Leipzig in 703, as I mentioned, and Leibniz read it and he commented critically on it, and Wolf changed his mind with regard to the conception of obligation, because, you know, as I said before, Pufendorf believed you have to have a lawgiver, you have to have the law, and you have to have sanctions, and without sanctions there is no obligation. And Leibniz didn't believe in sanctions, he believed in rationality. He believed that if you conceive of something as good, it moves your will, and there's no way that you won't do what you have conceived as good, not doing the good, so to speak. And you can be corrected, of course, because maybe your conception of the good is bad, because although you believe it is good, whatever. So that's a different story to see what Leibniz is, how Leibniz conceives of moral motivations and reasons, especially in theodicy. I won't comment on that. Our topic now is the German version of Wolff's Ethics, which he published first in 1720, and in which he published his new idea of Philosophia Practica Universalis in the first 22 paragraphs. So that's about maybe 30 pages. Unfortunately, there are no translation in any language, so you have the chance either to read 30 pages in German or 1,300 pages in Latin. Actually, I know some person who read it whole through, and that's not me. My life is too short for it. So, and he starts, all his German books start with vernünftige Gedanken, reasonable thoughts about. So whatever he is publishing, he publishes in the mood of the mathematical method, and in the mood of being rational. And the main idea here is that there is rationality, and rationality brings you into virtue and duty, and rationality makes you happy. So if there is unhappiness in the world, the reason for it is vice. Mention, tun und lassen. So reasonable thoughts about the actions and non-actions of human beings in order to foster their happiness. So it's a book which aims to make you happy. Good news. So now where is it here? Okay. There are alternatives. There are other guys who wrote on Philosophia Practica Universalis. The first one you might know is Alexander Gottlieb Baumgarten. Everything he published was in Latin, which was quite uncommon at the time because people changed to German, as I said. But Kant used the books of Baumgarten on metaphysics and ethics as textbooks for his lectures. There was a law in Prussia that all the lectures of professors should be given on the basis of textbooks, just to make it easier for students to follow the lecture, and to make sure that the lecturer is talking something reasonably, not talking about info. So he's bound to follow the textbook. And just because Kant never published a textbook on ethics and never published a textbook on anything, maybe except the anthropology, he was following Baumgarten. And Baumgarten is quite interesting because at some extent he's more closer to Kant, but in the end he belongs to the camp of Wolffians with some modifications from the movement of pietism. So he was brought up in the quarter of pietists at Halle, because Halle at the time was the, so to speak, you have two big movements in Russia, intellectual movements, and both you find in Halle. The first one is rationalism, and for rationalism, or maybe three even, stands Wolff. Then you have something like popular philosopher, even before Wolff, and this Thomasius, Christian Thomasius, who was an important natural law theorist. And the second one is pietism. And the pietists founded at the end of the 17th, beginning of the 18th century, at Halle an offensive for poor people, people without parents, and so on and so forth. And they had a lot of missionary activities all over the world. They went to North America, to India. They translated the Bible in the native languages of the people, which was of importance. And at these schools, there was a Latin school as well. People learned not only Latin, but German, and even women were educated there, so young girls, to learn German. Because, why? Because the idea is, in Protestantism, that you must be able to read the Bible. Because between you, the Bible, and God, there's nothing else. So there's no authority. There's no state, no church institutes, no pope, whatever. So to know what God's words is all about, you have to read the Bible. And because the Bible was translated into German by Luther and other guys, so you have to have at least the knowledge of understanding what's going on in the Bible. Then you are rescued. You do not need the Pope, you do not need priests in the end, you just need your heart, your feeling, and the ability to read what's all about. And therefore, there was, so to speak, a kind of little bit of enlightenment with the pietists as well, because they cared about the people. They cared about their well-being, they cared about the world as well, because they said, well, everything is made by God, and therefore it's important for the young children to see what the creation is all about. And therefore the missionary people going to the Americas or to India sent back to Halle something which is special for some art stuff, or some shoes, Chinese shoes, and so on, and some dead animals, you know, I don't know how to express in England, to make the people at Halle, the young people, see how wonderful the creation is. So they made sure that people really learned real stuff about the world and the language. But this movement of pietists was opposed to rationalism, because they believed in the priority of the heart, they believed in a particular way in which God communicates with the people. Wolf believed in God as well, but the God of rationality. And God is not something special, so to speak. God is rationality, like in Leibniz. God is rationality. And for the pietists, it's more than that. You cannot know God's will just looking up into your rationality. It's more, so to speak, you have to study the Bible and so on and so on. And Wolf is critical about that. He says, whatever you need to become a virtuous people, and whatever it needs to behave morally properly, it's in your reason. Therefore, even atheists, because if they are rational, can be good guys. And the pietists didn't like that idea. So it was a strong opposition in the beginning of the 1720s between Wolf and the pietists. And in the end, Wolf was forced to leave Halle, Prussia, and he went to a different country, Hesse, German country, in which he became a professor at Marburg, and later on he returned to Halle. But he was forced to leave, otherwise he would have been killed. So there was really this opposition between, say, in a nutshell, reason and feeling. Reason and theology not bound by rationality. And this opposition took place in Halle, and it was transformed to Königsberg. Because Halle was the most important university, founded in 1694 as an Enlightenment university. Many people from Königsberg went to Halle to study there, or many professors from Halle went to Königsberg to become a professor there. So the school in which Kant went, the Collegium Fridericianum, was founded by the pietists from Halle. It was the foundation of the pietists. It was a pietistic environment. And Kant, later on, more or less, he really distances from that, because he didn't like the idea to report about your own feelings, to bekenntnis, I don't know, to claim what your religious feelings are. He didn't like that, so to speak. He was more with Wolf and the idea that reason is all you need for becoming good moral people. So anyway, it was interesting. Baumgarten was raised up with the pietist, although he was very much akin to Leibniz and Wolf and so on and so on. And Meyer was a direct disciple of him, and Kant took Meyer's work, some of his works, as the basis of his lectures as well. The logic of Meyer, the so-called logic von Infler, was used by him. And Meyer was a professor in Halle at the time Wolf returned from Marburg in 1740. And although he was somehow a Wolfian, they didn't like each other. Especially Wolf didn't like Meyer, just because Meyer was young. He was smart, he was witty, he spoke the new language. Within maybe 20 years, the German language really radically changed. If you read something from 1720, from Wolf, this is really, really old-fashioned scholastic German. If you read Meyer, it's somehow like an author from Scottish Enlightenment. Witty, essay, he writes, and so on for the people. What effect did that have? Students went to Meyer, not to Wolf. And Wolf didn't like that idea. so whatever. So if you care about universal practical philosophy and its impact on Kant, you have at least three alternatives. You can read Wolf, you can read Baumgarten, and you can read Meyer. I think, although these are important, Baumgarten especially for Kant, obviously, Wolf is a better decision just because he's more rationalist. And it becomes more clear what his position is than Baumgarten. Baumgarten is really hard to understand, sometimes because he's so concise that you do not really sometimes understand what's going on there. If he believes, for instance, more in a Kreuzian conception of the free will, or if he belongs clearly to the Leibnizian Wolfian quarter of understanding the relation between will and rationality. So, however, here is the criticism you find in the groundwork of the Wolfian conception, but it doesn't mean that Kant has read Wolf's Philosophia Kantia, Philosophia Practica Universal. There's no objective proof that he did so, but because Wolf, that's a problem. Kant went to the Kollegium für Literatur at Königsberg as a schoolboy, but Wolf was read there extensively, because many people, many scholars, many teachers at that school were in favor of Wolf, and they tried to mix Wolf with pietism. And there was the most important professor in theology at the university, who was the head of the school at the same time, named Schulz, and he was particular because he said, well, let's find a middle way between both. Let's find a middle way between, revelation and feeling and the Bible on the one side, and pure rationality, as you find in Wolf and so on and so forth in Heiner. So the idea, and you find it in Kant as well, one of the decisive features of Kantian philosophy in general is that it took up different position and wanted to find a new theory in which all this position finds a proper place, so to speak. So rationalism is false in itself, empiricism is false in itself, skepticism is false in itself, but maybe you find a meta-theory in which every of these positions finds its proper place, so to speak. And this is what Schulz, the big important theology professor, tried to do in theology. And maybe Kant was, so to speak, came akin to this way of doing philosophy, not dedicating himself to something which already existed, but trying to find a new solution to what's going on. So anyway, here he's criticizing Wolf. He says, however, let it not be thought that what is here called for already exists in the guise of the propedeutic of the famous Wolf for his moral philosophy, namely that which he called universal practical philosophy, and that we do not therefore have to open up an entirely new field. I do it. You might, or might not, in the 1740s, Kant published his first work. It was very young, 25, 6, or whatever, I can't remember. And in this work he claimed, it's me who finds a new way in between in between Newton and Leibniz. It's me. I will solve the problem. And I will do something new. So there is the impetus, the spirit of Kant from this very, very early time to do something new, to improve the science, at first natural science and later moral philosophy and so on and so forth. There's always this new, to do something which the world hasn't seen before. And this also is true with this moral philosophy. Okay, no, let's have a look. DE means German ethics, Deutsche Ethik, paragraph 8. And you find it in Google Books or whatever, you can find that book, unfortunately, with this old, let's go, Gothic printing. So it's the first disadvantage is it's in German, the second one it's in Gothic. And even nowadays German students will have really problems to put the book in the right direction. Oh, where's I will have a course starting in October on practical reason from Wolf to the present time, and I start with Wolf. I'm looking forward to the first sessions in Wolf. Maybe nobody understands how to take the book in your hands correctly. Okay. Start with some quotations from Wolf. To bind someone to commit or omit something in nothing other than connected with a motivating ground for volition or non-volition. That could be a quotation many philosophers would subscribe to. So, obligating or committing something to do is to give a reason to. If I want you to do certain things, I give you a reason. If I want you to leave this room, I say, outside is a person who gives $1 million to everybody who comes along. Then you will leave. Oh, that's nothing else. Having good reasons and giving good reasons means obligating something. It's nothing to do with constraint and necessitating and whatever. It's just giving good reasons. Obligation, Verbindlichkeit, this is from another work, whatever. If one regards it as an action which we wish to call active, is the boundedness of a motive with an action. It may be either to do or to refrain from doing an action. But there is a motive in the representation of the good which flows from the performing action, and of the bad which flows from the refraining from an action. Since we want nothing else and do not want anything other than what we represent as evil or bad, so does it become clear from the nature of willing and not willing that man can be bound in no other way than through a motive that is connected to an action. This position is known today as Hume's requirement. If you read Christine Korsgaard, it's all about Hume's requirement. Hume's requirement means that nothing can be a reason for a person which is not motivating you. But that's not original in Hume. You find it's a standard position you find in rationalism as well. There can be no moral motives if these motives have not the effect of motivating you. Of course. What else? And what he is saying is that reason motivates you, just because of a conception of the good or of the bad. And he distinguishes here, what he doesn't do so clearly in the German ethics, between active and passive obligation. That is to mean, I be actively obligating you in giving you a good reason. I'm the author, so to speak, the guy behind active obligation. And you are the object of the obligation, means you are the recipient, so to speak, the object of obligation. So if you give me a motive, that's active obligation, and because the motive moves me in a certain way, that's passive obligation, so to speak. So without somebody giving a reason and somebody receiving a reason, there would be no obligation. And obligation is always about motive. And motive is interesting because, as I said, German words for Latin expressions, motive comes from the Latin motivum. And the English just took it over, it's what easy. But the Germans, motif, you sometimes find it in the 18th century, for instance in Garve, and Kant referring to Garve in on the Common Saying from 1793 uses the word motive as well. But most of the people don't use the word motive, but Bewegungsgrund. Bewegungsgrund means the reason or the ground which moves you. Which like Bewegung, like you found in the physical world. Matter in motion. It's a ground of motion. which makes you move in the actual world. That's Bewegungsgrund. There's a famous distinction between Triebfeder and Bewegungsgrund in the groundwork. Kant says, well, if the ground of moving has its origin in your sensibility, then I don't call it Bewegungsgrund, but Triebfeder. And Triebfeder is what you find in clocks. Not in my one, because it's electronic, but in former times, you see. And this moving stuff, it's called Triebfeder. The feeder which makes sure that the clock is moving, so to speak. And this is what Leibniz uses as well to make clear the conception of motivation. Leibniz says being moved means being driven, so to speak, like a mechanism in a clock or in a watch. You see. But here you have Triebfeder in Kant means being part of the natural world, and Bewegungsgrund means has a relation to pure reason and freedom. But Wolff doesn't make this distinction. Wolff says there's only one kind of Bewegungsgrund, and that is what is the conception of the good. And the conception of the good can be a clear and distinct conception or a dark and indistinct conception. And rationality is all about making something which is dark and indistinct, clear and distinct. This is what the process of rationality is all about. So you study your nature, you study the nature of all things, and you have a preconception of it. You think, for instance, I might think that this is water. This is my conception of what's in there. But in tasting it, I might realize that it's not water, but vodka. Some alcohols in it. Something which has a different effect on my body than water would have. Or maybe I think it's vodka and caipirinha, whatever, but it shows up to be just water. You see, so I had a preconception which is dark and indistinct, and making experiences or clearing up my concepts, I realized, okay, it's something different. And becoming smarter and more enlightened means studying nature, looking at things. And then, as I mentioned before, you see the rationality which is already there. So this is the idea involved. And there's no different ways no different kinds of motives. So talking about motives nowadays goes back to a certain tradition, which is became dominant because this tradition became dominant. This is British empiricism. This is Hobbes and Hume and so on and so forth. And you find this idea of motives in most of what is published on the theory of action in English. But the German tradition is a bit more complicated. Whatever. So this is the idea, and let's see what the next slice will present to us. Okay, here you have this quotation you know already about. The law of nature has decided everything and is itself entirely complete, not considering that it has not yet been completely understood. So the world is as it is. Whatever you might think about the world is determined, although you didn't have understood the determining grounds of it. Everything is complete. No miracles, nothing happens without the principle of sufficient reason, or as you might call it today, causality. Everything is there, it's up to you to understand. And he calls this the law of nature. And the law of nature as such is an expression which is not to be identified with the law of God. We will talk about that later. Because he discusses two further sources of obligation beyond the law of nature, human law and divine law. So what's the relation between human law and divine law to the law of nature? So I won't talk about human law because human law now is just the law given by the legislator. Now, if you want to know what the human law is all about in Brazil, maybe there are some codices and so on and so forth. If you want to know what are the basic laws in Germany, you look at the constitution, and then you have different other kinds. You go to the jurisprudence department and they can tell you.
It's a positive law.
It's positive law. Human law is a law which is made public through the legislator and so on and so forth. And this is a kind of rationalization of human society, you see, because before modern times, it wasn't made public. It was made, there was a king or there was a principal, and he was talking with his guys about how to reign his kingdomship, but it was not declared to the people. You as a normal people, peasant, didn't know what the law is all about. That you are only bound to follow those laws which were made public is a modern idea, an idea you found in ancient times as well with the Romans. So Roman law became very important for the European modern natural law, so to speak, which is of importance to you as well, because Wolf had an impact here in South America and so on and so forth. But it's not the medieval idea or the very early modern idea of how to reign a kingdom or whatever. Okay, so my question is, and that's a decisive question, to understand what's all going, what comes all about, the divine law and the natural. Is there a divine law, in which relation does it stand to natural? Okay. Wolf's views on rational agency is made up of two main theses. First, reason is the instructor of the law of nature. That's the first one. You only need reason to know the law of the nature. No? Only reason. Your reason, not the reason of your neighbor, not the reason of somebody else. It's your own reason. You can go into nature and study nature. You can become a little Newton or Galileo or whatever. You can do that. You can become a new Hobbes. You know, Hobbes claimed to be the foundation, the founder of a new science of politics. You can become that, just using your smart reason. Second, a rational human being needs no other law but is rather by means of its own reason a law to itself. Wow, that sounds like Kant. A law to itself. A rational human being, like you and me, needs no other law, but is rather by means of its own reason a law to itself. I'm a law to myself through using the reason, which is the ability or the power to understand the rational order in nature. Good news! Good news! A rational person performs the good because it is good and refrains from the bad because it's bad. If you tell me, if you drink it, you will be dead, I won't drink it because I don't want to die now. I don't want to commit suicide. So, but if I have the longing for dying right now and you tell me if you drink that you will die, I might do that. In which case he becomes similar to God. Wow! Again good news. You become similar to God. As one who has no superior who can bind him to do the good and refrain from the bad. This is huge debate about that. Because here he claims that God is rationality. And because you have rationality, you can become like God. That is to say, God cannot demand anything from you which is irrational. That means forget the Old Testament. If God demands to kill your son, or to kill your neighbor just because he wants to, you can say that's not God. Some devil or whatever. You can say no. And this is what the Bible critic is all about. You know, this is the area in which people think about the authority of the Bible. And they are asking, is every word in the Bible really trustworthy, or are there stories in it which you can forget? And you know that from Kant's Religion Within the Limits of Reason, 1793, in which Kant says in principle, forget everything in the Bible except the moral story. And the moral story is that Jesus is a symbol, an ideal of a person who managed to be perfectly good. And everything else you can forget. There are no miracles in Kant, there are no irrationality, and so on and so forth. So forget that. And there was a movement within theology, that's important, at the beginning of the 18th century in Prussia, especially in Halle, which regard Jesus, theologians, which regard Jesus to be the new Socrates. Jesus being the new Socrates. That means nobody claims that Socrates is a god. I've never heard about that. So this means that Jesus is just Socrates. He's very smart, he's very good, but he's not God. It's a symbol, it's an idea. This is something you can, and it was in theology. It's called neologists. Neologists, so new logos movement within theology. And Kant's philosophy, religion really is very much in this tradition. The brother of the Baumgarten I mentioned before was one of the main representatives of this movement. He isn't known so much with all the history of theology departments because everything involved was in Latin and it's not so smart. But he was very important. Okay, so here you have the idea you are your own, via your reason you are law to yourself, and you have the idea that through reason you can become a God. On the basis of his rational nature, God can give the human being no other law than the law of nature, but in no way a law that would be contrary to the law of nature. So God himself is bound by the law of nature, or bound by rationality, and in creating the world, he is creating the world through and through as a rational total. That's the idea. Remember, this is not Kant, just because, reason means you become reason like God in studying nature. You have to do empirical research. And the rationality is, the content of your rationality is outside, it's not in your brain. Kant would say, you are a reason, you are the lawgiver to yourself, but lawgiver doesn't mean the content, but the form. It's a form. Therefore, Kant talks about formality. And we will see, the course about the Doctrine of Virtue, that in the Doctrine of Virtue, Kant introduces certain ends, that is what he calls contents or material, which derives directly from reason. That's a new idea he has as regards to this position of 84. So, this is Wolf. We experience very often that cases of fortune follow from good actions and cases of misfortune follow from bad actions. But through his decision, God made certain that things should so take place. So the idea is very optimistic. Very, very optimistic. Optimistic means that you can rely on reason, not only become a virtuous guy or woman, but also become happy. And this is an idea Kant hated. He said, there's no way that in this world pure rationality or the moral law brings you to a happy life in terms of being the owner of a car and traveling around and having good food and whatever. There's no way to have this necessary privilege. Nature itself raises the rule, do that which makes you and your condition more perfect, and omit that which makes you and your condition less perfect. Sounds like a categorical imperative. It's the perfecite in Latin, it's a short version. Make yourself perfect. Make yourself perfect means improve your rationality. And we will see that Kant takes up in the Doctrine of Virtue this idea of perfectibility. That is to say, he says, you are bound to perfect your own personality. And you are bound to perfect or to contribute to the perfection of other people. This comes in the groundwork as well, but not in the specific way Kant introduces this way of perfectibility. Because in general, the categorical imperative, you see, there's a decisive difference between the categorical imperative and this perfectivity rule. What is the difference? The difference is that in Wolf, you do not know what your duties are until you became very rational. You might think that it's a duty to drink this water because you have good reason to drink the water, but afterwards it shows up that it isn't water but something else. It kills you. So the imperative involved means become smarter, then you know your real duties. But without being smart, you do not know your duties, your rationality. That is to say, this is a kind of Platonic picture of morality. The stupid are not able to act morally correct. Bad luck. Bad luck. The stupid are not in the position to do the right things. But what is Kant said? Kant says, not everybody can do that. Because the categorical imperative is very clear, and you know from the beginning, you come in, say, 18 years, not 18 years, then you know from the beginning what is good and what is bad. It doesn't depend of improving what Kant calls your understanding. You are not, so to speak, it's not necessary to travel and to go to Rio and to explore the world to know what is good and bad in general. It's just you and your rationality find a principle which is the basis of a universal morality. That's the idea. That's really a difference. And this comes with Rousseau at the beginning of the 60s, in 76. Kant says, the famous, you might know the famous notes Kant took down around 70, 64, 65. There was two translations in the year of the publications of Rousseau's Émile and of Rousseau's Du Contrat Social, both published in 1762. And in the same year, German translation appeared. And because Kant probably didn't read French, he read the German translation. He was really struck by that. Because Rousseau claimed that everybody from the start has an access to morality. The Platonic picture that first comes you have to first study logics and metaphysics and then comes ethics. It's wrong because even the peasants do know what is good and what is bad. And Kant took this, so to speak, this position of equality between the person. He took up from Rousseau and he criticized himself in this note saying, well, it was Rousseau who brought me on the right track. So I have to look up for a moral principle to which everybody has access without studying philosophy first, or doing research in the natural sciences. This is the idea. And this makes really a difference between the Wolffian picture of the morality and the Kantian one. And this one is to some extent more akin to pietists. The pietists were rationalists, of course, but they believed that everybody can have a good heart. That to have a good heart, it's not necessary to study metaphysics or logic, or doing a class on syllogisms and Aristotle. And before that, you are not possible to even understand what's morality. It's just saying, well, it's in you. Look into your heart. Look into your feelings. Look into the relation you stand to God, and so on and so forth. Then everything will be revealed to you, so to speak. Okay, now story goes further. Virtue can only exist with natural obligation. All remaining obligation functions as nothing more than superficial versions. So virtue isn't a concept used in opposition to obligation involved. It's just the strength in doing what obligation requires you to do. So if you have understood that it is good for your health to drink the water and you feel some resistances in you because you do not want to drink because you have some anti-acting emotions, then you have to be strong, so to speak. Then a kind of stoicism comes in. And this is what virtue is all about. And this is the non-Aristotelian virtue. Because in Aristotle, virtue means that you find the right answer to the question, what shall I do? The Melotis-Lehre. And then you use your judgment, the power of judgment, and so on. And then you find the right answer. But the right answer is already there involved. You know what is good and bad. And virtue comes in as something which is necessary to really act in according to something like that. So the story of many, at least of Anstrom, there's this famous article published of Anstrom in 1958 about modern moral philosophy, and she criticized bird being too loud, and so on and so forth. And she said, well, forget the Kantian picture of morality, it's all about obligations, there's no virtue and so on. But she actually has no idea about the way in which the concept of virtue was used in Kant and before Kant within this rational theory. But anyway, there's a sharp distinction between this concept of virtue and the neo-Aristotelian. Okay, the rule of the senses, no? If you are not totally rational, the imagination effects consist in slavery. Now you have to be very strong if you love your emotions. Because he says, what is moral philosophy all about? It's about being your own master, being autonomous, so to speak, not being a slave, neither to other people nor to yourself. And this is an idea to be master of yourself, which is very, very much shared in the 17th and 18th century by different groups of philosophers. You find it in Pufendorf, you find it in John Locke, you find it in Kant. Kant is talking about this kind of self-mastery, especially in his lectures on anthropology, but also in his Doctrine of Virtue, or in his smaller essays. He says it's all about self-sustaining of rationality, Selbsterhaltung der Vernunft. So reason must sustain itself in their use. And this is about having mastery. And he takes this up, Wolff has this idea as well, and says, well, there might be an opposition of rationality and senses imagination effects. So the idea, inclinations, vices versus pure reason, which you find in Kant, has some prehistory. When it comes to the judgments of reactions in such a way that they represent to us as good, that which reason represents as bad and explains as bad, that which reason calls good. So the feelings say, it's good, do it, take the drugs. And reason says, no, don't do that. There's something like a battle between both. And it's not so easy to understand how this functions because, he believes that free actions are actions according, to do a free action just means that you're acting on what you conceive as being good. Anyway. Then one says that they conflict, which is other, confliction. And if a human being contradicts the senses, the imagination, and the effect, or gives the upper hand to reason, that person overcomes themselves, and after one overcomes oneself, and therefore has one's free actions, in one's power, one is master of oneself. This is the idea that the more rational you are or become, the more free you are. It's the idea of degrees of freedom matching to degrees of rationality. And Kant believes in this position until the end of the 1770s. He seems to believe that Wolff was right in this particular. But later on, he didn't believe it. So autonomy never comes in degrees. Autonomy is always there or not there. And rationality is always there. So it's not a necessary connection between it. Okay. Do you have power to follow?
Yes.
Okay. Of course. Yeah. Now maybe I read it now because that's easy, more easy. So this is the Wolffian picture. And now see how people react to the Wolffian position. And then I have this German guy who was later on professor at Halle, and he was one of the main opponents to Kant, you might have. There was a debate between Eberhard and Kant in the 1790s, and Eberhard claimed that whatever you find in the Critique of Pure Reason, you already find in Leibniz. And whatever is rational in Kant is Leibnizian rationality. And Kant was upset with that. But although he was very critical of Kant, you will see that he distances himself from the old Wolffian picture of what's going on in obligation and so on and so forth. And the other one is Keynes, who, although he belongs to the school of moral sense philosophers in Scotland, distances himself against the too anti-rationalistic conception of sensibility. And they meet somehow, that's my thesis, somehow in the middle, so to speak. Okay, in the eyes of his critics, Wolff's conception of freedom and obligation have serious flaws. Neither is the elitist thought convincing that one is only capable of acting virtuously if one has previously made the correct inferences, nor is it obvious why we value human virtue above else in the world if it is only a variety of knowledge. So what Wolff says, ask, what is the most important thing in the world for you? What's the most important thing? Think about things. What's the most important thing? Brazilian soccer team, Caipirinha girlfriend, mama, rationality. He believes we value rationality above all. And the critics say, yes, the critics will say, oh, is it really true? If you want to understand the context in which Kant develops his doctrine of the principle of autonomy and of obligation, then it is helpful to look for an alternative to it developed by one of the young Wolffians as a case with which to contrast Kant's view of moral philosophy. How do the young Wolffians react to the newest British and French philosophy? So they were reading them. Wolff had a good knowledge of British and French philosophy himself, of Locke and all these guys, Descartes, of course. But that was decades before philosophers. The following would like to return to Johann August Eberhard, whose moral philosophy has rarely been considered in the current literature. Eberhard, this nice guy over here, is indeed a Wolffian, but he represents himself as receptive to suggestions he receives through his reading of the English moral sentimists, so he calls them. As a Wolffian, Eberhard first traces thinking and feeling back to a single foundational power of the mind, namely our capacity to have representations. So actually in Wolff there's only one basic faculty, and it's the faculty of representations. In Kant you do not find one basic faculty, it's three. Sensibility, no, even more. You have in the higher faculty, you have the lower faculty, you have the higher faculty, and the higher faculty is understanding, judgment, and reason. And there is, of course, the distinction between higher and lower. That is to say, there's a decisive difference between sensibility and the higher faculty rationality as such. And Wolff doesn't subscribe to that. Okay. Second, as a Wolffian, he identifies freedom with rationality. The more free you are, the more rational you are, the more free you are. And third, as a Wolffian, he attempts to cognize the rational ground of our feelings. Whoever wishes to resolve moral disagreement cannot rely on the moral feelings, for in that case moral feelings would stand against feelings. That is the argument of the rationalists against the moral sense theories. They say, if it would be true that feeling alone would be the basis of our moral distinctions, then because people have different kinds of feelings, there would be no way to resolve the conflict between people because they just complain, I have different feelings. You know, this is the position of Stevenson in the 20th century. Stephen would say, there's no way of arguing with other people morally, it's just that you can try to manipulate them or to convince them in a certain way. You can try to make them have the same feelings with you, but there's no way of a moral disagreement in a certain way. The judgments of moral feelings must be able to turn into judgments of reason. That's the position of the Wolffians and of Eberhard. They must stand before the judgment seat of reason. Explicitly distancing himself from Wolff, Eberhard calls for a methodological turn in moral philosophy. So although he shares some ideas, he says we have to follow a new method. Eberhard considers false strict compliance with Wolff's synthetic progressive method, which begins with a definition of statements and ends with a derivation of conclusions. The method must be supplemented with the analytic regressive method. Do you remember the groundwork in which Kant says we have to follow two different methods? The first one is analytic and the other one is synthetic, and you find that in Eberhard 3 years before. So it seems to be that Eberhard, in methodological speaking, seems to be of interest for Kant. Kant probably read what he was talking about. So you have to combine two methods. First step is to analyze concepts, and then the second step is to combine these concepts to find new insight into the ground of morality. Before the good can be conceived of and thought of after, it must be felt. That's this idea. First comes feeling, and then comes rationality. Eberhard sees the merit of the English moral sentimentalists in their discovery of moral feelings. On their basis, we can overcome the gap between the science of cool and of life. The profound thoroughness of Wolf must be paired with, quote, the admiration of experience with what is popular and practical in the philosophy of others, unquote. So the idea is, although Wolf claimed to start with empirical observations, they aren't really. He was, so to speak, not really making exact observations. He was not really observing what was going on in our sentimentalist feelings and so on and so forth. But we have to be more strict in our observations, and the British moralists, especially the Scottish ones, are our, so to speak, heroes in this regard. So how does Eberhard carry out the analysis of moral feelings? Because there is a gradual transition between feeling and understanding, we have cognized the ground of a feeling as soon as we have achieved a distinct representation of it. The understanding cognizes clearly and distinctly what we feel as obscure and confused. This is the Wolfian position as well. If we apply this method, we see that perfection is the ground of our pleasure and imperfection the ground of our displeasure. If we combine the analytical method with the doctrine of clear and distinct representations, moral judgments are thus to be interpreted as cognitions that are wrapped up in the inner sensations of the soul. Moral judgments express an obligation. Much like Wolf, Eberhard begins with the thought that, quote, the nature of human beings and of other things is the source of obligation for internally good and evil questions, unquote. But the cognition of an obligation as such does not represent a sufficient motivating ground. That's the decisive difference. So it's not sufficient for our motivation to recognize the rational ground of our feelings. There must be something, there must be added something, some feelings, so to speak, which speak for themselves. That reason itself is practical, is illustrated in our feelings. But the moral sense and the sense of beauty are therefore lively sensing reason. That's a quotation from him. The moral sense and the sense of beauty are therefore lively sensing reason. So there is reason, but reason being represented, so to speak, with an emotional background and so on and so on. And without these emotional elements and surroundings of reason, reason will never be effective. This is ideal. So we have to open up the theory of rationality and motivation for feelings, because without feelings, reason will never motivate. And you know that from Kant with the feeling of Achtung, respect. So the feeling of respect is feeling. Without the feeling of respect, there will be no chance that the cognition of the moral law will have an effect of our decisions for or against the moral law. It comes with feelings. Okay. Some quotation. A duty is an action which is therefore my obligation. In accordance with the law and its grounds, it is therefore a rightful action. If an action is in accordance with the law, but not the ground of the law, then it is deceiving the law. The nature of human beings and of other things is the source of obligation for intended good and evil actions. That could be written by Wolf himself. But not that one. But the moral sense and the sense of beauty are therefore lively sensing reason. lively sensing reason seems to be nonsense to me. That's nonsense. Because rationality itself is lively. It's called lebendige Vernunft, lively reason, lebendige Vernunft. The concept of Leben, of life, is important for pietists as well. You know, the word of God is lively. Jesus is alive in the word of the Bible, so to speak. And he took it over from British models. So it follows from the nature of clear representations that the feeling of truth must be officious with some liveliness, which cold reflection does not have, but is capable of having. This is anti-Wolffian. This is opening up the space for feeling in terms of motivation. You do not need to have feelings to understand what is good and bad, but you need to have feelings to make you move. And this is, if you read the Doctrine of Virtue in Kant, you find some important passages in which Kant is talking about respect, feeling, compassion, and all this stuff which you need to make reason so to be effective. So Kant believes that just being rational is never enough to make human beings move in the right direction. Okay, and you find, this is another guy, Johann Georg Sulzer. He was a Swiss philosopher who was secretary at the Kingly Prussian Academy of Science in Berlin, and he was a Wolffian. And there was a letter exchange between Kant and Sulzer. And Sulzer is mentioned in the footnote of the groundwork. And in the footnote of the groundwork, Kant refers to a letter. Sulzer, probably at the beginning of the 1770s, 13 or 14 years before Kant published the groundwork, wrote to him asking Kant, have you an explanation for the fact that although we have a clear representation of the good, we do not act accordingly? Why are we still barbarous, Schiller asked. Why are we still barbarous if we have a clear conception of what is good and bad? How can you explain it? So he was driven by this problem, according to him, as a Wolf, and Wolf didn't solve. And Kant sees the importance of this question, and in the footnote of the groundwork he says, well, the late, because he died before, the late Sulzer wrote a letter to me asking how morality can be effective. Here's the answer. The groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, in which I show that first of all, to make the moral law effective, you have a clear conception of the moral. That's the first thing. So the first step is to become a true rationalist, to see that moral law rests on specific concepts which have their origin in pure reason. But second, you need to have some feelings. But these feelings are not feelings coming with your natural nature, so to speak, but have a certain origin, namely reason itself. He says, the feeling of acting is caused in us by our rationality. So this is the claim. The claim is that human beings are affected by their rationality. They have a certain kind of respect. This respect doesn't mean that you act out of respect for the moral law in every case, so to speak, but without this, so to speak, general feeling of the importance of rationality for yourself, you will never take care about your rationality. You're not interested in the backside of the moon today. So it has no effect. Somebody can tell you all the details about the backside of the moon, the backside of the moon. You would say, oh, interesting. Oh, really? So, or about, I don't know, the traffic in Munich today. I can tell you, like on the internet, oh, there's much traffic in Munich and the weather's like this and that. And you would say, oh, interesting. But you wouldn't care about it. And somebody can tell you, oh, here's all the story, this is a story about the moral law. And you can say, oh, interesting, but I'm not into it. I don't care about that. So there must be some cement which holds it together, your sensibility and your rationality. And the Kantian idea, I believe, is that it is done by the concept of reason, the interest of reason, which has an effect on the sensible side of yourself as well. And this he refers to as the concept of art. Okay, so the truth, and Sulzer, because he has no good conception of what rationality is, failed according to Kant, of course. The truth that one wishes to sense must be at the same time touch the soul and enchant it, if I may so express myself. The truth that one wishes to sense must at the same time touch the soul. If rationality doesn't touch you, it is as important as the weather forecast of Berlin today for our life here in Belo Horizonte. Okay, here comes home. And Hume came, was really, nowadays nobody really knows him except of some people doing the history of moral philosophy. But in the 18th century in Germany, not only in Germany but also in Germany, he was very, very, very influential. There are many books of him translated into German, big, huge books. He's maybe not as smart as and witty as Hume, and not so groundbreaking as Hutcheson was, but he was of interest. He had aesthetics, he has a moral philosophy, he was doing natural philosophy, he was a jurist from profession, and so on and so forth. And this one, the essays on the principle of morality and natural religion were published in Britain in 1951 and translated in 1968 as Versuche die ersten Gründe der Sittlichkeit. Principles translated as erste Gründe, but prima philosophia, so to speak. So it's the basic of it. So he claims approbation or disapprobation merely is not sufficient to subject our conduct to the authority of the law. So Hutcheson claimed what? Hutcheson said there's a concept in his on the moral sense. I think it was published in 1728 or whatever. Hutcheson said, forget the concept of obligation, because the concept of obligation comes with the theory of rationality. And the theory of rationality you find with the Cambridge philosophers, Cutworth and maybe Cumberland and all these bloody unimportant guys living behind the mirrors of Cambridge University. So forget them. What is important are feelings, a sense of moral sense and so on and so forth. And obligation is not important. You can do moral philosophy without this concept. And Hume later agrees with Hutcheson, but Keynes doesn't agree with that. He says approbation or disapprobation merely, that is to say feelings merely, are not sufficient to subject our conduct to the authority of law. These sentiments have in this case the peculiar modification of duty, that such actions are what we ought to perform and what we are indispensably bound to perform. This circumstance converts into a law what without it can only be considered as a rational measure and a prudential rule of conduct. Nor is anything omitted to give it the most complete character of a law. So the idea is there are cases in morality, and justice is the most important one, in which our feelings are more than just feelings. They, so to speak, our feelings feel like being reason. So feelings which are coming with a kind of rational constraint. So although they are feeling, they are not just that, because they're coming with necessity. So the rule of justness, Gerechtigkeit, are more than feelings. They are really, they incorporate some rationality. So you remember, Eberhard comes from rationalistic side, going to feelings, and he comes from the feeling side saying, well, sometimes it's really not just feeling, it's more than that, it's rationality. Okay. That was the story I was telling you before that. Maybe we have some more time to look on the situation in the groundwork, or before the groundwork, in a lecture on anthropology from 1781, 72. Kant speaks of the maxim and the principle of self-preservation, of healthy reason, not of human beings but of reason. That is to say, I must accept nothing that the free use of reason would make impossible. And that's an idea, I think, which makes clear what moral philosophy in Kant is all about. It's about ourselves being rational, being free, and that we should make use of our freedoms or our power of freedom in the way that we can live and sustain our reason in this world. So to speak. That's all about it.